I'm Olive, 35 years old. Since graduating from college, I've worked as an office clerk in the fashion industry. I've always been committed to my job, and it's been like my romantic partner. I climbed the corporate ladder quite smoothly because I love what I do. However, working in a predominantly female company meant fewer chances to meet someone, so my love life was rather limited. Once I hit 30 and saw everyone around me getting married and having kids, I decided to sign up for a dating service. That's how I met George. From the first date, George was laid back and easygoing, the total opposite of me, who's always in a hurry and rather impatient. At times, I thought he was a bit unreliable, but then I realized that's something I can handle. I decided that George could fill the gap where I lack easygoingness and chose to marry him. George was raised by a single mother, but neither he nor his mom were interested in living together after we got married. The often told tales of mother-in-law and daughter-in-law conflicts had me relieved that neither of us wanted to live together. When I met my mother-in-law for the first time before our wedding, she seemed to be sizing me up with a critical stare. That confirmed my feelings that I didn't want to share a home with her. No living with my mother-in-law, and a new chapter begins with George as a married couple. We'll make compromises even when our values clash. That was my resolve. So, a month into our adjusted married life, something completely unexpected happened. "Hello, Olive. How are you? Still no baby? I want to see my grandchild already." "Hi, mother-in-law. It's been a while. What brings you here? What's in the bag?" "Oh, didn't George tell you? I've decided to move in." "What?" Of course, George had never mentioned any such plans to me. Both he and his mom had told me before our marriage that neither of them was interested in living together. So this was a complete curveball. "Hey, mother-in-law's here at the house. She says she's moving in? What's going on?" "What? Mom did mention feeling lonely, but I never heard anything about moving in. I mean, I told her it was okay if she felt too lonely, but living together?" I hid away to make the call, and when George said that, I unintentionally let out a "What?" "Why did you say it was okay to live together without discussing it with me? She probably got the wrong idea. Aren't these the kind of decisions we should be making together?" "Well, I thought having Mom around to help with chores might be nice." When I had greeted her at her home, the last thing I felt was that she could handle household chores. The kitchen was coated in dust, clearly untouched for a while, and the whole house was cluttered. It was nowhere near what you'd call neat. "I want to enjoy my lunch, so I'm gonna hang up now," he said, and abruptly ended the call. Just as I was getting used to life with George, the idea of adding mother-in-law to the equation was overwhelming. While I stood there in disbelief, my mother-in-law called me over, looking annoyed. "Olive, your stuff is in the way. Move it already, will you? Honestly, you can't raise a kid in such a cramped house." "Well, George and I have decided not to have kids. I'm 35 and George is 38. Having a baby past 35 is considered high risk, and I wanted to focus on my career. So we had agreed before marriage to live a peaceful life, just the two of us." I said that mainly to keep my mother-in-law at bay, so we wouldn't have to face daily nagging about grandchildren. But my words set off mother-in-law like a firecracker. Her face turned beet red with anger. "Why? I can't believe you're married and not planning to have kids. I raised George all by myself, and you say you want to live a spoiled life?" "I respect that you raised George while working, but we've decided—" "I don't want to hear your excuses. You're the worst daughter-in-law." My attempt at pacifying mother-in-law had spectacularly backfired. She stayed furious and spent the next while berating me, not even allowing me room to defend myself. "Hey, I can't live with mother-in-law. She's been making a big fuss about wanting grandkids again today." After George came home, I discreetly talked to him about the day's events in our bedroom. George, however, was only half listening. mostly engrossed in his smartphone, offering occasional disinterested replies like, really? Eventually, he put his phone down, got into bed, and closed his eyes. George, are you even listening? I was listening, but Mom's lonely, so what can you do? I owe her for raising me as a single mother. I want to repay her kindness. So, Olive, you'll have to put up with it for a bit. My annoyance flared up at George, who, claiming he was tired from work, quickly drifted off to sleep. I was frustrated firstly with having to pacify my mother-in-law who's been going on and on about wanting grandkids, and secondly with George for unilaterally deciding we'd live with his mom. I'd heard that marriages are built on compromise. I knew families successfully managed to live with in-laws. Day one was a disaster, but to continue my life with George, it looked like I'd have to be the one making sacrifices. Waking George up to vent my anger was out of the question, so I accepted our living situation. Later, I'd realized this choice was a mistake. I often found myself wishing I'd shaken George awake that night, given him an ultimatum between his mom and me. Because the next day, mother-in-law's harassment began. Olive, just because you work doesn't mean you can slack on housework. George and I are starving, so hurry up and make dinner. Okay. When I got home from work, George had already returned and was watching TV with mother-in-law in the living room. George isn't someone who can't cook. Before, if I came home late, he would have dinner ready for me. Yet today, for some reason, he'd done nothing. Even the dishes from the morning were still in the sink. He seemed to be enjoying a quiz show with mother-in-law while I was left to prepare dinner alone in the kitchen. When I finally laid out the meal on the table, mother-in-law twisted her lips in disapproval again. What's this? Mostly frozen food, huh? You think it's okay to feed this additive packed stuff to an elderly person? I'm sorry, I've been busy with work. Being busy with work is no excuse. Has George been eating like this every day since you got married? Poor guy. If his health goes south, it's on you. While mother-in-law angrily scolds me, spitting as she speaks, George quietly eats his meal. George, who side glances at the TV and seems to be enjoying himself while his wife is being yelled at by mother-in-law, doesn't seem like the George I know. Throughout dinner, mother-in-law never stopped complaining at me. A wife who can't even cook and won't have kids is the worst. George could have done so much better. Prioritize George and me over your job. She kept going on and on until I was so mentally worn down I couldn't even understand what she was saying anymore. That night, I broke down crying in our bedroom. The thought of this life continuing was unbearable. George seemed surprised to see me cry. I told him I can't live with mother-in-law anymore, but George looked exasperated. My mom is important to me, so I want you to treat her with respect too, he said before falling asleep. I couldn't even muster a rebuttal to George and cried until I fell asleep. Life with mother-in-law, filled with nothing but suffering, continued as it was. George doesn't have to do a thing. Housework is a wife's job. Once mother-in-law said this, George truly stopped doing any chores. I continued to juggle work, household tasks, and being yelled at by mother-in-law. When mother-in-law found out George and I had separate finances, she started demanding money from me. You're my son's wife, so giving me an allowance is your natural duty. She demanded money with this ridiculous reasoning. I was so tired of being yelled at that I just gave her the money, thinking if it could be solved with cash, so be it. My home no longer felt like a place to relax. When heading back home after work, my feet felt as heavy as lead. I spent days wondering how long this life would continue, feeling utterly hopeless. Then, a pivotal incident occurred. I'm home. What's going on? Come here for a second. I arrived home that day, burdened with yet more emotional stress. Waiting for me at the entrance was George, his face twisted in anger. George, who had greeted me at the entrance, pulls me into the living room. There, sitting on the sofa, Mother-in-law looked downcast. Did something happen? This is all Olive's fault, isn't it? You must have done something. It was the first time I had ever seen George angry. Although I was shocked, I racked my brain. I had no recollection of doing anything to make Mother-in-law feel this way. Feeling agitated, George finally told me what was bothering him. I heard you've been making snide remarks to my mom every day when I'm not around. She even told me you only cook when I'm here, so she's not getting meals. What's your aim in being nasty to my mom? I was dumbfounded and couldn't speak. George had fallen for the lies Mother-in-law had fed him. It was Mother-in-law who had been making snide comments when George wasn't around, even complaining about the food like, "Isn't this too salty? It looks awful." Yet I had never stopped serving meals. I was certain I had fulfilled all of Mother-in-law's demands. I haven't done any of that. I cook even when you're not here, and I've never made any nasty comments. Stop lying. As George scolded me, Mother-in-law looked over his shoulder at me and grinned slyly. George had decided that I was lying and took Mother-in-law's words as truth. Looking at George like this made me feel like my head would explode. Maybe this is what people mean when they say they've woken up. As George continued to rage, he snapped at me. Get out! Go back to your parents' home and reflect on yourself. Sure, I'll reflect. I really had to reflect. I had to reflect on why I had been wearing myself thin serving people like this. I quietly packed my things and left the house. When I got to my parents' house and explained the situation, they were shocked at my appearance. I hadn't realized it, but the stress from living with Mother-in-law had caused me to lose a significant amount of weight. Holding me in her arms, my mom cried, "I wish I had never approved of this marriage." My dad said, "You don't ever have to go back." Luckily, my parents' home was a commutable distance to my job, so I took them up on their offer and started my life afresh at their house. Every now and then, I'd get an email from George checking in on me, but I left them all unread. As I worked hard and relaxed at my parents' home, I felt like I was breaking free from the brainwashing. I used to think that to keep my marriage to George, I had to endure whatever Mother-in-law said. But a marriage with a husband who prioritizes his mother over his wife is not worth keeping. It took quite some time before I could look back and laugh at what a fool I'd been. Have you cooled your head yet? Yes, I feel much clearer now. Thanks for sending me back to my parents. Months passed, and I returned to the house where George and Mother-in-law lived. George was waiting at the front door. I smiled and headed toward the living room. Mother-in-law was seated, glaring at me as I entered. "You're late! Being away this long is unacceptable for a wife. You owe George and me an apology for what you've done and for leaving this house unattended." Mother-in-law spoke loudly, and George agreed as he sat next to her. Without sitting down, I pulled out some documents from my bag. I won't apologize. However, I don't want to make either of you uncomfortable anymore, so I've prepared this. Both George and Mother-in-law's eyes widened when they saw the papers I placed on the table. The document was a pre-filled divorce application. Divorce? Hold on, Olive. I never thought about divorcing if you just apologized to my mom. Don't get it twisted. I'm the one who wants to divorce. I'm tired of being yelled at by Mother-in-law every day and being treated like a maid. I thought I was doing it all for you, George, but it seems you care more about your mom than me. I don't see the need to value someone who doesn't value me. I realized that after clearing my head at my parents' house. I expected George to be shaken. However, I was surprised to see Mother-in-law trembling as well. Now, Olive, calm down. Divorcing is a hasty decision. Maybe I've been harsh on you, but it's not that I hate you. I just wanted you to become a respectable wife. I don't want to become a respectable wife as you see it, so thanks, but no thanks. What's making you so nervous? Is it because you had a hard time without your free and limited housemaid for these few months? Mother-in-law couldn't argue with my statement. The house I'd kept clean despite all of mother-in-law's criticisms was a mess after just a few months of my absence. Clearly, housekeeping wasn't mother-in-law's strong suit. I came here today to deliver the divorce papers. If you're not willing to agree to the divorce, I've decided to consult a lawyer. Please mail it back as soon as you've signed. Goodbye. I left George and mother-in-law, both looking pale and downcast, and walked out of the house. Finally saying what I needed to say, I felt refreshed as I headed back to my parents' home. Shortly after, George promptly mailed me the completed divorce papers. I easily got my divorce and returned to a life where work is my primary relationship. I'm truly happy living life on my own terms now. As for George and mother-in-law, they seem to be living quietly in their dust-filled home. When I told the matchmaker who had set us up about our divorce, I was shocked to hear that George had re-registered with the dating service. He's apparently looking for a new housekeeper, but given his age and divorce history, his search for a life partner isn't going well. I had resigned myself to staying single forever after the ordeal, but recently a younger colleague told me he's interested in dating with marriage in mind. I'm unsure what to respond, but the truth is, I'm growing fond of this adorable, puppy-like person. We're in the stage of going on dates, and I have a feeling I'll end up being swept off my feet by this colleague. Here's hoping this marriage works out better than the last.